Today we're going to take a couple of minutes real quick and we're going to talk about manic discussion posts. They're my own actual invention, something that I've come up over the course of my 17 years of teaching, but sometimes people are a little bit confused on them, so I want to talk about how I came up with them and what exactly is expected out of you. Now, initially, when I started teaching online, it was hard to try to figure out what's the best way, and people still wrestle with this today. What's the best way to get people responding to each other online? Because what happens is sometimes, if you're just responding to the reading, people might just regurgitate what's being said. Or at the same time, people might respond to their classmates by just saying a simple, I agree. Well, neither one of those is very good. So I tried to come up with, I wrestled with a lot of different ways to come up to where my students, I felt like, were having more meaningful discussions online. And this mnemonic of Manic went through some different iterations that aren't important, but I ended up coming up with it. So let's talk a minute about what we mean by the Manic posts. Now, they're broken down into 5 things. For every chapter that you read that I assign Manic posts, you're going to come up with 5 different things. As you read the chapter, you ought to mark or do whatever you do to make sure you know, because you're going to have to answer 5 questions. First of all, M, what is the most important? Out of everything that you've read, what is the most important? But as with everything else in the Manics, not just what's the most important, but why do you think it's the most important? What is it about what's being said that out of everything else you've read, what makes this the most important? A, agree. What do you agree with? Now that should be a fairly easy thing, just pick out something that you agree with. But again, what do you agree with and why do you agree with it? N, not agree. Now, this is something that for some reason a lot of people struggle with. I get emails all the time that say to me, now Dr. Curry, I can't find something that I don't agree with. My response to that is generally the same thing. This is an academic exercise. Your job, your responsibility is to find something that you don't agree with. Now that should not be that difficult. In other words, you're not thinking hard enough if you can't find something that you disagree with. Now that doesn't mean you have to disagree with it completely. We're not talking, 2 ends of the political spectrum. But what's something that if you look at it, you say, I disagree with at least part of this. Right? That's your responsibility. What's something that you disagree with and why? Next, interesting. Sometimes we read things that we just read and maybe it had never occurred to us or anything of that nature. And when we read it, we think, I didn't know that. And that's your interesting comment. And then, of course, this is graduate school. So the C is generally not very difficult. Confusing. What is it when you read that when you look at it, you go and relook at it, that you just keep thinking, what does that mean? Well, that's your confusing statement. And again, why? What is it about the statement that you don't understand? So again, Manic, what's most important? What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? What do you find interesting? And what do you find confusing? Manic. As you go through these things, once you write yours, then depending on which class you're taking and how many responses I require from you, you're required to respond back to your classmates. And it's not I agree with your agree. That doesn't do anybody any good. We're always going to answer the and why to these things. Because I think if you do these correctly, what's inevitably going to happen, that student A might put a certain comment as their agree. But for student B, that might be their not agree or confusing. And if you find that discrepancy between what you think and somebody else, then you ought to post and comment on that and see if you can help each other understand. That's the exercise of Manic posts. Now, the other thing that you'll find is as you do your Manic posts, I'm not going to jump in there. Because here's what happens. The second that I jump into the Manic posts, and the second that you say, well, this is confusing, and I jump in and I answer that, then all of a sudden nobody else has any impetus to answer. Nobody else has any impetus to jump in and become part of that conversation. So what you'll find is generally a week or so later, after you've passed this week's Manic posts, a week or so later, I'll come back in and start answering some things that hadn't been cleaned up. Now, I might do it by video, I might do it typing it out, but either way, I'll come back and try to, anything glaring that you really need clarified as far as your general understanding of the field, I'll come back to. But the Manic posts are an important part of taking a class from me, because there's something that I really believe in, and it helps me to suss out where your thinking is. So you ought to take them seriously, and you need to answer every question, all 5 questions, most important, agree, not agree, interesting and confusing, for every single reading that it's assigned for. If you don't answer all 5 questions, you're not going to get credit for that posting. So if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me, but this should be a good basic overview of what the Manic posts are all about. Take them seriously, take your responses seriously, and I think that what you'll see is we'll end up having some really good discussion in the class.